I moved into Willow Heights 2 years ago, right after my father passed away. He was a Medal of Honor recipient, served 3 tours, saved 6 lives in combat, and never once boasted about it. Quiet man, tough, honest, the kind of person who saluted the flag every morning without saying a word. So when he passed, I wanted to honor him in the simplest, purest way I could. I hung a large American flag on a sturdy pole in my front yard, just like he used to do when I was a kid. It was clean, well-maintained, and positioned perfectly in the center of my manicured lawn. Nothing gaudy. Just a flag and a small bronze plaque at its base that read, "In honor of Sergeant Daniel R. Hawkins, Hero, Father Patriot." I thought it was a peaceful tribute. But 3 days later, I found a note taped to my front door. "Your flagpole violates OA aesthetic standards. Remove it within 48 hours or face fines." No signature. Just the HOA logo stamped at the top in bold red. I stood there on the porch, holding the paper, feeling my stomach twist. The flag swayed gently behind me in the breeze, like it had no idea it had just been deemed an eyesore. I called the HOA office that same day, trying to be respectful. "Hi, this is Sam Hawkins, over on Brookpine Lane. I got a notice about my flagpole?" The voice on the other end was clipped, rehearsed. "Yes, sir. It's not in compliance with HOA Regulation 14B regarding exterior modifications." "It's a memorial to my father," I said calmly. "He was awarded the Medal of Honor. The flag is there to honor him." There was a short pause. "That's admirable, sir, but rules are rules. The board will vote on your exemption request if you submit one." Exemption? I didn't need an exemption to honor my dad. Still, I agreed to submit the form and attend the next HOA meeting. The room was full when I showed up, half bored retirees sipping coffee, half power-hungry suburban warriors in collared shirts. Leading them all was a sharp-eyed woman named Karen Whitmore, the HOA president. The kind of woman who probably labeled her spice jars alphabetically. I stood, read my statement, and told them what the flag meant. It's not a political message. It's not a protest. It's a memorial. That's all. Karen raised one eyebrow and flipped through her binder like she was hunting for a technicality. "Mr. Hawkins, we sympathize with your loss, but this flagpole doesn't match the neighborhood's visual standards. It's tall. It's prominent. It could encourage others to make similar changes." "You say that like it's a bad thing," I replied. A few people chuckled. She didn't. "You may fly a flag from a mount on your porch per regulation, but not a freestanding pole in your yard. That's the rule." And just like that, my exemption was denied 5-2 vote. I walked out feeling humiliated. My heart was pounding in my ears. This wasn't about a flag anymore. It was about control. About the HOA telling me what parts of my identity were acceptable in public view. That night, I stood by the pole in the dark and remembered my dad's voice. "Son, don't let anyone tell you who you are. That flag's not just fabric, it's a story." The next morning, I left it up. Then came the warnings. First a $50 fine, then $100. Then the threats started getting nastier. I'd come home to find measuring tape strung across my lawn, people taking pictures of the pole from the sidewalk. Once, a guy even knocked on my door, clipboard in hand, claiming he was documenting violations. I told him to get off my property. "We're just following process," he snapped. "You're trespassing," I said, "and this is harassment." Karen sent another formal letter a few days later. "If the flagpole is not removed by the end of the week, we will escalate the matter to local authorities." I thought it was a bluff until the cops actually showed up. 2 squad cars parked right on the curb, lights on. My neighbors peeked through blinds. Kids stopped riding their bikes. A small crowd began to form. One officer approached me calmly. "We received a call from the HOA. They claim you're in violation of neighborhood ordinances and refused multiple citations." I was stunned. "You're kidding. You came out here for a flag?" "We just need to see the documentation." "Sir, I went inside and came back out with a copy of my father's military service record, including the official letter that came with his Medal of Honor. I handed it to the officer. He scanned it, then looked up, eyes softer now. "Sergeant Daniel Hawkins?" "My dad," I said quietly. He turned to his partner and whispered something. The second officer nodded. Then the first one stepped forward and did something I didn't expect. He saluted the flag. Karen, standing across the street with a few other board members, looked absolutely mortified. Her arms were crossed tightly, but she said nothing. I thought maybe, just maybe, that would be the end of it. But it wasn't, because later that night I got another letter. This time it wasn't about the flag. They were digging deeper. Now they were accusing me of unauthorized lawn alterations, improper lighting, and even plant overgrowth exceeding code height. They weren't backing off. They were doubling down, and something in me snapped. I'd been trying to stay respectful, trying to go through their system, but now it was personal. They wanted a fight? They were about to get one, and this time I wasn't just standing up for my father. I was standing up for every homeowner who'd ever been bullied into silence. It would have been easy to take the flag down. Plenty of neighbors told me just that, soft suggestions, whispered like warnings. "It's not worth the headache, Sam. You don't want to be that guy, trust me." But after the cops came, after I watched them salute the flag while Karen stood frozen in the background, I knew this wasn't just a personal grudge anymore. This was a battle of principle. And they had made the first move. Within 48 hours, 3 more violation letters were shoved into my mailbox. Unauthorized modification to landscaping, because I had a flower bed surrounding the pole. Use of unapproved exterior lighting. I had a soft solar spotlight aimed at the flag at night. And the most absurd, failure to maintain a visually cohesive front yard environment. Visually cohesive? What does that even mean? It was clear Karen and her board were weaponizing the rulebook, grasping at straws, hoping the bureaucracy would wear me down. But I had something that didn't. The truth. That weekend, I reached out to my dad's old Army buddy, Captain Ray Jennings. He lived 2 towns over, and when I told him what was going on, he didn't even hesitate. "I'll be there Monday morning, and I'll bring the big folder." Monday arrived, and so did Ray. He stepped out of his truck in full formal dress uniform, medals, ribbons, everything. He stood at attention beside the flag, perfectly still. Within 15 minutes, neighbors started trickling out of their homes, whispering, watching. I went live on Facebook. Ray began to speak. "This flagpole honors a Medal of Honor recipient. Sergeant Daniel Hawkins wasn't just a soldier, he was a hero. I watched him carry 2 injured men through live gunfire while he himself was bleeding from the leg. This flag flies for that man." He pulled out a binder and began flipping through documentation, letters from commanding officers, the official Medal of Honor citation, even newspaper clippings. It was irrefutable. Karen came marching up the sidewalk. Not long after, sunglasses on, clipboard in hand, like she was preparing for war. "This isn't a permitted gathering," she barked. "You didn't submit an application for public demonstration." Ray didn't even flinch. "Ma'am," he said, "I'm not here to protest. I'm here to honor." Then he looked her dead in the eyes and added, "You can fine me too if you'd like, but I'll gladly wear that fine with my medals." The crowd applauded. I could see Karen's jaw tighten, but she said nothing and turned on her heel. I thought for a moment that maybe the public pressure had worked, but then came the twist. 3 days later, I received a cease and desist letter, not from the HOA, but from their lawyer. Apparently, my social media activity constituted public defamation. They accused me of tarnishing the HOA's image, and unless I removed the video, which had now reached nearly 90,000 views, they'd consider legal action. I laughed, but it wasn't the funny kind of laugh. It was the I dash can single quotes T dash believe dash this dash is dash happening kind. They wanted to bury the truth under paperwork and silence. That's when I knew I had to push back harder. So I went bigger. I submitted a request to declare the flagpole a historic memorial marker under state law. With Ray's help, we collected testimonies from veterans, filed official forms, and compiled a detailed case. It wasn't quick, but it was real. And while the process took its time, I kept the flag up and continued documenting everything. Every fine, every HOA letter, every passive-aggressive note shoved into my mailbox, I made it public. Suddenly, the story wasn't just my story. Local news picked it up. Then a regional veterans group. By week 3, I was getting calls from journalists and a retired senator who once served with my dad. The pressure started to mount on the HOA, but Karen wasn't the type to back down. That's when she made her move. She scheduled a mandatory HOA board meeting with one item on the agenda: emergency amendment to exterior structure regulations. If passed, it would allow the HOA to forcibly remove unauthorized memorials if they were deemed disruptive or divisive. It was a targeted strike. But I had a counterattack ready. The night of the vote, I showed up early with nearly 50 supporters, including 5 veterans in full uniform and several neighbors who had changed their minds once they learned the full story. We filled every chair. Others stood in the back. The atmosphere buzzed with tension. Karen took the mic, looking confident. We must maintain visual unity in our neighborhood. While we appreciate personal tributes, our responsibility is to the community as a whole. I stood up. You mean your responsibility is to control the community? My father died defending freedoms you're trying to regulate out of existence, she fired back. It's not about patriotism, Mr. Hawkins. It's about rules. But this time, the room wasn't with her. People began speaking up. A neighbor who'd served in Iraq. A mother whose son was in boot camp. Even one board member broke ranks and said, "We've gone too far. It's a flag, not a circus tent." The vote failed. 4-3 against the amendment. Karen looked shaken, but I wasn't done. The next morning, I filed a formal ethics complaint against Karen with the HOA's Oversight Committee. I included evidence of targeted harassment, misapplication of rules, and personal bias, and I wasn't alone. 2 neighbors submitted supporting statements. But even in the small victory, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt exhausted. I hadn't slept well in weeks. My stomach was constantly in knots. And despite everything, the flagpole still stood in the same place, quiet, unwavering, while I was the one weathering the storm. It made me think, was this what my dad felt like every day in combat? Fighting for something bigger than himself, knowing he might not win, but doing it anyway? That realization humbled me, and it prepared me for what was still to come, because Karen wasn't finished yet. She had one final card to play, and it would test everything I thought I stood for. I knew Karen wouldn't back off for long. People like her don't just retreat, they reload, and sure enough, barely a week after the board voted against her amendment, a letter landed in my mailbox with a new name on the signature line: Marcus D. Trent, Compliance Enforcement Director. The HOA had brought in outside help, an enforcer. I could almost hear Karen laughing behind the scenes, wiping her hands clean while someone else carried out the next attack. She was smart. This move gave her deniability. The message was clear. If the board won't bend the rules, we'll find someone who can. Marcus showed up in person 2 days later. Sharp suit, clipboard, slicked hair. That I'm just here to do my job attitude. He knocked on my door with a thin smile. Mr. Hawkins, I've been contracted to assess compliance concerns regarding your property. Let me guess, I said. You're here for the flagpole. I'm here to ensure all members of this community are treated equally under the covenant rules. Your case has drawn unusual attention. Because it's not a case, I snapped. It's a memorial to a war hero, my father. He didn't blink. We'll be in touch. A week later, I was served official HOA arbitration notice. They were trying to force a hearing private off-record. No cameras allowed, where they could review the necessity of memorial installations and determine if continued presence is justified. It was a coward's court. I could feel the stress building like pressure behind my eyes. I wasn't just angry, I was exhausted. My stomach ached constantly. My hands trembled when I drank coffee. The fight was consuming everything. I sat outside that night staring up at the flag, lit by the gentle solar spotlight. It waved slowly in the wind like it didn't have a care in the world. For the first time in weeks, I cried. That's when I heard footsteps. I turned and saw Mr. Billings, my elderly neighbor from 2 doors down, walking up my driveway. He'd barely spoken to me since I moved in, always kept to himself. He was holding something in his hand. A box I served with your father, he said softly. My heart caught in my chest. He opened the box. Inside was a folded flag, weathered, clearly old, and a photograph of 5 young soldiers in Vietnam, arms slung over each other's shoulders. One of them was my dad. That flag flew over our fire base the night we got ambushed, Mr. Billings whispered. Your dad saved my life. I've kept this ever since, but I think it belongs here now. He placed the box in my hands, then looked at the flag on the pole and added, Don't let them take this from you. That moment changed everything. The next day, I contacted a local veteran legal advocacy group. They took my case pro bono and filed a restraining order to halt the HOA's arbitration, arguing that the memorial flagpole was protected under federal and state law. At the same time, a local news station aired a follow-up story featuring interviews with veterans, neighbors, even Mr. Billings. They showed the flag, the plaque, the letter from the HOA. The video exploded online. Karen tried to stay quiet, but now her name was being mentioned in comment sections and community forums, and none of it was good. People started digging into her past board decisions, finding a pattern of petty power trips disguised as regulations. Pressure grew. Even other board members began distancing themselves from her. One quietly resigned. And finally, after a month of legal standoff and public backlash, the HOA caved. They released a public statement. After reviewing all relevant information, the board recognizes the importance of honoring our communities. Veterans, Mr. Hawkins' memorial flagpole will remain in place and no further action will be taken. Victory, but it didn't feel how I thought it would. Sure, I was relieved, proud even. But more than anything, I felt tired. I stood out on my lawn that night, the neighborhood quiet, the stars above. The flag fluttered gently, catching just enough light to make the red, white, and blue shimmer. And all I could think about was how far we had gone, how much we both lost in the fight. Yes, Karen had abused her power, but I'd also gotten caught up in the war. I let it consume me, define my days, turn every interaction into a battlefront. We both had something to prove, but neither of us was really listening. A few days later, I saw Karen walking her dog alone on the trail behind the houses. I hadn't seen her in public in weeks. Normally, I would have turned the other way, but this time I didn't. Hey, Karen. She froze for a second, then gave a small nod. Mr. Hawkins. There was a long pause. Then, to my surprise, she sighed. I should have handled it differently, I blinked. Yeah, me too. She looked up at the sky, then back at the flag visible over my roof. My father served too. We didn't always get along, but I know what that flag means. I just thought if I made one exception, the whole system would fall apart. Sometimes the system needs to fall apart, I said, so something better can be built. We didn't become friends, but we nodded at each other after that. Sometimes that's enough. This story wasn't really about a flag. It was about respect for history, for service, for the values we pretend to hold dear until they inconvenience us. Taught me that fighting for something meaningful isn't always about winning. It's about standing your ground when it would be easier to stay quiet. But it also taught me that revenge doesn't heal anything. It just escalates pain until everyone forgets why they were fighting in the first place. Honor doesn't live in documents or rule books. It lives in how we treat each other, especially when we disagree. And as long as that flag stands in my yard, I'll keep remembering that, for my dad, for my neighbors, and for myself.